My first question will be for you, Mr. Cunningham. I'm interested to hear, and you did both mention it, about plain packaging. And the reason I want you to go maybe a little bit more in detail without reading all of that, but is that in the last week in previous committee, but also as a sponsor, hearing other some senators still have doubt. They wonder, like most will say, yeah, sure, maybe, but does it really work, and how does it work, and how big a difference, when we're talking about result, can it make? So if you could maybe go back to that and really give us a bit more details on that.
Sure. Mm-hmm. With the chair's permission to answer the question, to show some examples of what the tobacco companies do, this is a package at Belmont, it appears, but when you open it, the package comes out, but part of the package is really an advertisement. So that's one way they get around existing advertising restrictions. That's one benefit of plain packaging, because you would have a standard format, you wouldn't allow this. Here's another example. It's a special box for De Maurier. You open it, you actually have the cigarettes, but you have an empty metal tin, and again, you have a box with advertisements. Plain packaging would work. The House of Commons Standing Committee on Health recommended it in 1994 after a study at that time with the evidence available at that time. The World Health Organization recommends it, and governments one by one across the world are considering the evidence and are moving forward despite very strong opposition from the tobacco industry. Of course the tobacco industry is going to be opposed. They said that smoking didn't cause lung cancer. They said secondhand smoke is not harmful. They said restricting advertising or sponsorship is going to have no impact. If you have a better warning on the package, it's going to have no impact. They're always in denial. The strength of their opposition is a very clear signal that we're on the right track. And the evidence worldwide available to members of this committee and to all senators is very compelling.
Thank you.
Senator Seidman, followed by Senator Eggleton.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you both very much for your presentations. You both proposed a lot of amendments. And so I guess that leads me to ask you whether you have been involved in the consultation processes on this piece of legislation. And Mr. Cunningham, perhaps you could respond first, and then you, Ms. Henderson.
So we have been engaged in each of Health Canada's consultation processes. We appeared before the Standing Committee on Health of the House of Commons that had a study with respect to e-cigarettes. The Health Canada and the Minister hosted a national forum at the beginning of March. We participated in that with respect to future directions in the tobacco strategy. E-cigarettes is a complex issue. I mean, the bill deals with tobacco as well. But there is an opportunity, I think, for this committee to strengthen the bill with its input. But we have been involved in consultations.
Ms. Henderson?
Yes, the Lung Association has also been involved. We did appear before the Standing Committee of Health on electronic cigarettes a couple of years back. We have also been involved in the consultations with Health Canada on the new federal tobacco strategy. And although we do have a lot of amendments, we always like to have the best picture moving forward. We think that the bill is quite strong, but with these amendments, it would make it very much stronger.
Senator Eggleton, to be followed by Senator Stewart-Olson.
I'm going to follow up on that because a number of these things don't necessarily need amendments to the legislation. They could be done in the regulatory framework subsequently. Are there one or two of them that you think are particularly important to be amended? An amendment to the legislation?
So I think with respect to tobacco, I think the further restrictions on promotion that are proposed, such as what Quebec has done in incentive promotions, banning menthol. Just to show you here, this is when Ontario banned menthol cigarettes. They did not affect traditional pipe tobacco. So a company came out with bullseye menthol pipe tobacco. It never existed before, but it's simply a loophole to get around the ban. So I think this is one measure that would be very straightforward for the committee to do in terms of an amendment. With respect to e-cigarettes, there's a number of measures with respect to advertising that you've heard from a number of witnesses. I think there's an opportunity with respect to that. And I think if we were to have a minimum age potential for increase, there would have to be some, at least, scope for regulatory change, because there's nothing in the bill. There's no regulatory authority at the moment.
But you're not suggesting the banning of menthol for e-cigarettes?
No. For nicotine replacement products, there are some flavors that for nicotine gum, nicotine lozenge. The Standing Committee of Health did not recommend a ban on all flavors. So it's important that the government have regulatory authority for flavors. You know, there's been testimony that some consumers of e-cigarettes are using these as part of their switching. No government worldwide yet that I'm aware of has really made a dividing line as to which flavors to ban and which not to ban as far as e-cigarettes are concerned. Clearly there's some going to have a special youth appeal, but the government has the regulatory authority to actually ban or restrict flavors in the future, and that regulatory authority is important.
Senator Stewart Olson to be followed by Senator Griffin.
Thank you, and thank you both for being here. A lot of work's gone into these your presentations, and I appreciate it. I'm wondering what you think of, and I'm going to deal with the government's responsibility to launch a public relations campaign and continue the fight for a smoke-free country. But I'm wondering, what you think? The plain packaging sounds like a good idea, and we've heard lots about it. But I'm wondering, are they going to continue the warnings on that plain packaging? We haven't seen a mock-up or anything, but I'd like your input as to what should be on the plain packaging.
Sanderson?
Absolutely. So for plain packaging, this is a mock-up that has been created. So the idea would be that the graphic health warning is still on the product itself. It still reaches the current level of warning that is required. The standardized part of it is that it would be a drab brown color, or whatever color is decided would be the color that is allowed to be on it. It will also just include the brand name on the product itself. This is very important because it really brings attention to the health warning itself. The health warning itself can often be lost in tobacco products that, as Mr. Cunningham has shown, have very appealing marketing places. There's a very small tube called Vogue cigarettes right now. They are Slims, and they are very appealing. They look like a tube of lipstick. So further restrictions to make this very shiny, metallic, appealing box of product that kills 1 in 2 long-term users is just absolutely needed. There's no need for products to look attractive if they're going to cause such harm to public health.
Okay, let's follow up on this a little bit now. With regard to the current bill, do you believe the language is strong enough to prevent internal pop-ups, goodies, and other things once you take the outside wrapper, as per the existing uses of the inside of the packages to get you once you open it?
So I think that in terms of the legislative authority for future regulations, the bill is very well drafted. There is one issue with respect to brand names. And how clever can the tobacco companies be with new brand names? Can they have a new brand that's called Sexy Man, or Pretty Woman, or Super Cool? And I think this is a question for Health Canada to ensure that they have the regulatory authority to be able to restrict brand names. We proposed an amendment that would provide some clarification. If Health Canada feels that regulatory authority is there, that answers the question. But I think that is one thing that I think needs to be ensured to be done. Otherwise, I think there's, it's clear that, there's going to be regulations going to be needed after this bill is adopted. But this bill provides a letter of authority for the subsequent regulations.
Okay, thank you. Senator Griffin.
Thank you. You both mentioned that you had been involved in consultations, and I'm wondering, have you actually had consultation with the provinces? I'm assuming you've had consultation within your provincial counterparts, but have you had consultations with provincial governments? Because obviously there's an impact on them. There's a negative and positive impacts. The negative impacts that won't make as much in taxes. The positive impacts that should cut their health care costs, which I would suggest would be much appreciated. So have your organizations consulted with the provinces?
Yes. And Health Canada has also consulted. There's a mechanism where there's ongoing consultation with provincial, territorial, and federal governments with respect to tobacco control. 8 provinces have brought forward legislation with respect to e-cigarettes to date. And in every case, within specialty vape shops, it would be permitted to display e-cigarettes and to have other information available to consumers. And this federal legislation would not affect those type of displays in those specialty vape shops. So I think there is a role for the federal government and the provincial government. And with respect to provincial issues, yes, we're in ongoing consultation at that level.
Okay. Ms. Henderson?
Absolutely. So the Lung Association, we have a provincial association in every province, and right across the country, our provincial associations have been involved in consultations with their various provincial governments. They have been very active in the vaporized products, especially as it relates to smoke-free laws, various things like that, to protect the health of people who are non-smokers and don't want to inhale any other products. We have also been involved in the various consultations on all various types of tobacco amendments at the provincial level. I wouldn't be able to go into absolute detail of every single one, but it's an ongoing discussion.
Thank you.
Okay,
Just before I go to the second round, I want to come to an issue that you mentioned, I think Mr. Cunningham and other of our witnesses have mentioned, and that is you are hopeful that the regulatory authorities will act quickly to plug loopholes that emerge. Now, from our experience in dealing with prescription pharmaceuticals and other health devices, we know that in order for the regulatory authority to act quickly, they have to have the tools to do so. The regulatory authority is bound by legislation that contains them with regard to whatever it is that is being regulated. Have you given thought to any particular changes that are required within let's say the legislation affecting Health Canada or another body, because it wouldn't be just Health Canada potentially dealing with these devices. Have you given any thought to any new tool that a regulatory authority needs in order to be able to respond quickly to things that emerge in the marketplace to find their way around the legislation?
So a number of answers to the question. I think in some cases, we've identified some problems with the existing bill. Amendments can be made here, so we don't have to wait for the regulatory process. Second, we need to ensure that Health Canada has the regulatory capacity to be able to respond, and that's why a strengthened federal tobacco control strategy as of April 2018, properly funded, will be very important. There have been significant changes that have reduced that capacity, and we need to ensure that they have that proper capacity. I don't think there's any legislative amendments needed to the legislation specifically for the Department of Health. It's been raised with respect to the amendment for cellulose acetate tow in filters. That's maybe an amendment with respect to excise legislation that I think there's some aspects there that would need to be amended. But I think ensuring we have the clear legislative authority, the clear regulatory authority in the bill, and where possible to adopt measures in the bill itself, so we don't have to wait for the delays and the uncertainty with respect to that provisions, as well as ensuring the capacity, I think, of Health Canada, I think, are the most important things.
With regard to acetate tow, I think one of the suggestions was that this be placed on the Restricted Substances Act. After all, it is a chemical substance. Do you see that as perhaps being the most effective way? Should it be regulated? Would that be the most effective way to deal with it?
So I think a key strategy to deal with the unlicensed factories producing cigarettes that are unlicensed, and a very important source of the illicit market now, is to intercept raw materials outside of the reserve before they get to the reserve. That could include leaf tobacco, it could include cigarette paper, include the filter material such as acetate tow. So I think that is a real opportunity and is one of the most important measures available to us to reduce illicit trade. So to have whatever the mechanism is, and I won't comment specifically with respect to the legislation that you've just mentioned, but there may be a number of options. But the bottom line is that we need to have complete information about the source of this that's entering Canada and have complete control to be able to intercept it before it gets to reserve in the unlicensed factories.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go to a second round, and once again, I'll begin with Senator Petitclerc to be followed by Senator Seidman.
Merci. I want to take you, I hope not outside of a comfort zone, but maybe we can start with you, Madam Henderson, and both of you. I want to have your a bit more of a moral and maybe philosophical position from your organization on the place of vaping in that bill. You know, we talk about the balance that this bill is going to achieve in terms of protecting everybody that you're trying to protect from your association, while access to smokers to something that is likely less harmful. So how does your organization feel about that balance?
So the Lung Association has struggled with this because we want to prevent lung disease in Canada. That's our mission. But at the same point, we offer smoking cessation services. We want to help people who are currently smoking quit smoking. People are highly motivated to quit smoking, and having the correct smoking cessation devices available is critical. However, we've also seen this product emerge, and we've heard from people that it has gotten them off of smoking tobacco. Evidence has started to show that, and although that there's going to be likely harms, especially to the respiratory system associated with vaporized products, we really foresee the need to regulate the products themselves. So then this bill takes a good step into that direction until we know all the harms that are associated with long-term use. However, we also really think that there needs to be the regulatory framework available to adjust as more harms and benefits become available on vaporized products. It has really been a struggle within our organizations because we want people not to smoke tobacco. It's the #1 cause of lung disease. And people have come to us and said, we want to use these products. Can you tell us about them? But there are associated risks. So it's something that we have definitely struggled with, but this regulation takes it into a positive direction because it will give some more restrictions on advertisement, on promotion, and that type of stuff. It will also make sure that therapeutical claims have to be based on evidence, and it gives regulatory approach to that. So that's one reason why we support this bill in moving forward.
Thank you.
We've had recommendations with respect to nicotine replacement products for decades. With respect to this particular bill, I mean, we support the bill. And in terms of the balance, I think more can be done with respect to restricting advertising, you know, to follow what's been done in some other countries, and also to ensure that Health Canada has the capacity to be able to respond in the future. And in some respects, the flexibility that they seek and they need is actually in the current wording of the bill.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Senator Seidman, followed by Senator Eggleton.
Thank you. I did actually want to ask you about tightening up the advertising, because we have heard this now from several witnesses. And so right now, the advertising for e-cigarettes is much looser than it is for tobacco products. And we did hear that New Zealand right now, last week, in fact, tightened up their advertising for e-cigarettes, and that might be a good model. Now, if I understand correctly, that means no lifestyle advertising at all, not even to adults, and no advertising on TV and radio. But I ask you, you know, how do you restrict advertising, for example, on the internet? You know, if you say no advertising for kids, then at all, then you have sort of a serious issue with regard to that. Could you comment on what we might do around advertising? I know you both spoke about it in your presentations, but it kind of, you know, gets lost in all the other amendments, and I think here's something that we might try to focus on.
Part of it is restrictions on content. And if you were to limit permitted advertising to information advertising and brand preference advertising, and the Canadian Vaping Association, they were fine. We should really, they're talking about is information advertising. That would have a big impact in terms of what kids did see. So I think that is part of the remedy.
Okay, Ms. Henderson.
I would agree with what Mr. Cunningham said of including information and brand preference, and that's a really restrictive of the content, and we do support the restriction around lifestyle advertisement and the restriction on where any type of advertisement can be, including bars. One of the important things is to make sure that people who have quit smoking do not go to vaporized products. So as evidence gathers, to make sure that as we understand more evidence as it moves forward around the motivations to switch to vaporized products, we really want to make sure that people who have already quit smoking do not go back to something that will have harmful effects as vaporized products, because they are currently living a smoke-free life.
Thank you. Senator Eggleton to be followed by Senator Griffin.
Well, you've made a good case about the packaging. I don't know how prevalent that is in that industry, whether most of them are doing it or not. You can comment on that, but I want to ask you, though, specifically about the use of trademarks, because the Intellectual Property Institute of Canada made a submission here. It says that the purpose of the submission is to ensure that the government is aware of how the proposed amendments would affect trademark rights for brand owners in Canada. So this all comes to the question of what identification would be put on a plain packaging system in terms of the brand, players or whatever. Would you see it just as a plain typeface as opposed to a trademark? And if the trademark was allowed, what difference do you think that makes?
So yes, you would have the brand name appearing on the package in a standard location, font style, font size, a white on the background. It might appear in a couple of parts of the package, and that's what Australia's done. That's what other countries have done. From a legal perspective, the bill ensures that a trademark owner, including for graphics and logos and mountain scenes and other things that you currently have on packages, they would continue to maintain registration and ownership of that trademark. They also, if we were to follow the Australian example, would be able to use any trademark, any color, any graphics and logos on a wholesale box shipped between manufacturers, wholesalers, and retailers, but not seen by consumers. So there would be some use in that respect. So these legal arguments have been raised in other countries that have been dismissed. So in Australia, their highest court, the High Court of Australia, dismissed claims for expropriation. In the United Kingdom and in France, legal challenges have been dismissed. The European Court of Justice has dismissed a legal challenge. And in Canada, when the tobacco companies made an argument that when federal regulations required 50% warnings, they argued in Quebec Superior Court that this was an expropriation of their trademarks and their packages. And they lost. And they appealed to the Quebec Court of Appeal, and they lost again, unanimously. They didn't even try to appeal on that issue to the Supreme Court of Canada. And the courts basically said you need to have a change in property ownership. And this is not being a transfer from the companies to Health Canada. It's a regulatory provision that restricts the use, but it's not preventing tobacco companies from preventing other people from using it. So that is what it is. The trademark is to prevent other people from using it. So this is a legal issue that's been raised. In our view, it is without merit, and there are certain provisions with respect to Bill S5 that help clarify that.
I'm really not an expert in trademark, and I would defer to Mr. Cunningham.
Okay, thank you. Senator Griffin.
In your pile of research, did you find anything that showed that plain packaging results in more contraband cigarettes being produced and sold? Because, of course, that's what the tobacco companies are telling us, that it will lead to a greater amount of contraband because of the plain packaging.
No. And, in fact, this is an argument we hear from tobacco companies year after year. They say that if you ban the visible display of product in retail is going to cause contraband. They said that if you increase the size of the warnings from 50% to 75%, it's going to cause contraband. In fact, contraband has gone down since the increase in size of the warnings, based on certain estimates. Contraband in Canada has gone down. It peaked in 2008. And by a number of measures, including relocating the border post near Cornwall, it was a choke point, it reduced contraband. Some other enforcement actions have contributed to it. And the data that was referred earlier today by Professor Hammond with respect to Australia and their data refute the claims of the tobacco industry. They always say the sky is going to fall. You know, we heard, remember, if we have smoke-free restaurants, all these restaurants are going to close. Well, we have a thriving restaurant sector well after and immediately after those smoke-free laws came into force.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we'll try getting Senator Petitclerc to be followed by Senator Eggleton. You said you
Maybe just one question on, again, on advertising, but on the other side of it, in terms of information. In your view, how does S5 answer to being able to provide information to a smoker that would want to use vaping, for example? Do you feel that there's that it is restrictive enough, yet allowed to provide that information that might help someone make a decision?
So the bill would certainly allow information advertising. I'd also point to Clause 39 in the bill, which provides regulatory authority and an additional pathway with respect to health-related claims. And you know, the government may consider whether that Clause 39 needs to be clarified, but that is in the bill. As well, there's regulatory authority with respect to warnings. So Health Canada has a considerable latitude in terms of what health messages they would want to require in association with these product categories.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I think it's very important to provide information, but I also would look under this legislation for Health Canada to provide information about vaporized products, both the benefits and risks associated to users. I think it's very important that we take the approach that the Health Canada or the regulator would be able to provide this information instead of companies themselves, as we want to make sure that it is very accurate.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Eggleton to be followed by Senator Seidman.
Just a little follow-up to the last question I asked. You know, I can understand the plain packaging rationale from the standpoint of what you've shown there. I mean, that's got to be stopped. But the use of the trademark or the logo, what difference do you think it makes? Put aside from the legal aspects of it having been dismissed. I mean, if you put players in plain language or players in their logo, what difference do you think it makes?
Well, it makes a big difference because you can associate something with, you know, femininity. So, for example, you have Vogue, and you have a stylized Vogue. You know, that could be association, you know, similar to the magazine and thinness and so on.
It's just the name of the product. That's
sure.
all you would be allowing.
You would still allow the name under the proposed plain packaging regulations, but you wouldn't be able to have stylized letters. So you could certainly still have the brand name. And companies can trademark anything. And here's one example of Canadian Classics cigarettes. And last Canada Day, they had a special Canada Day edition of this package. And so here you have the maple leaf, and here you have the names of provinces and territories, and here you have special A edition, spelled EH. And they can trademark all of that. And you can trademark, and I mean, the regular Canadian Classics package, you still have the maple leaf, but they have a sort of a mountain scene. Maybe it looks like Lake Louise or something like that. They can trademark that. And so unless you're able to deal with it, they can exploit it.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. This bill leaves a lot to the regulations, a lot. And so are there aspects like, for example, the e-liquid and some kind of standards around the e-liquids, especially those that contain nicotine? are there things that we should be aware of that they're not in the legislation? They're going to go to regulations. Is there something that should be built into the legislation? Is there some kind of monitoring aspect that we should, for legislative monitoring, say in 3 years, 4 years? I don't know. What would you respond to that?
So I think it would be wonderful if Parliamentary Committee could review progress with respect to this Act, for example, every 2 years, and a report could be submitted to Parliament annually. We see this, or periodically, annually or 2 years. In Quebec, it's 5 years. The European Union has for certain categories every 2 years. There are some very good aspects in the bill with respect to reports to Health Canada, with respect to both tobacco and with respect to e-cigarettes, so that we can have some information to respond quickly as developments emerge. But again, certain things could be done in the bill itself, and that's why you have a number of amendments. Senator Eggleton invited us to select among our proposed amendments. We would certainly hope that you would consider all of them. We're not able to, concisely highlight, more than just a few in a short answer. But we think that we've considered these, we've engaged in consultations, and we offer them for all of them for your consideration.
And absolutely, additional monitoring is needed without a question on the various use of vaping products, as well as the current trends in vaping products. And there also needs to be the ability to act quick. There needs to be restrictions on contents, but mainly emissions, and I believe that this bill does address emissions. I will make note once again of flavoring inside vaporized products and the ability to have flavorants that might cause associated risks. The World Health Organization has, in a report to the World Health Organization, they have identified this as potential risks. So to have the ability to regulate that is really important as more information becomes available.
Okay, in this regard, one final question, Mr. Cunningham, with regard to the discussion we were having just a little bit earlier, and on this issue that Ms. Henderson has just raised. Let us suppose that there is a signal in social observation that the new great sticky vapor product that is supposed to be very aromatic is causing health problems. I'm going to ask you again with regard to speed, do you believe that within one of the current regulatory agencies such as Health Canada there is sufficient power for Health Canada to act to remove that product from the market on the basis of some significant issue, such as we see with baby cribs, for example? If there are a certain number of deaths, Health Canada has the ability to pull them off the market. When we studied prescription pharmaceuticals, we found Health Canada didn't have the authority to remove prescription pharmaceuticals at that time, prior to the legislation that arose subsequent to our studies, to remove one product from a company's list of products, even though it might have been implicated in deaths of teenagers with regard to particular types of products. So my question is back to you. Let us suppose that there is an observation that people are getting ill, significantly ill, possibly even deaths from some new component of flavor within a vaping product. Do you believe that the regulations currently are clear enough to an authority such as Health Canada to be able to order the temporary or permanent recall of that product?
So I have two parts answer to your question. The first is, if it's some defect like a defective battery or defective heating device, there is the ability under the Canada Consumer Product Act, Safety Act, to in effect have a recall. But if it's something else, because if it's just some harmful additive, no, there is not that ability for a recall. There is ability to have a regulation to ban additives, but there is no ability to suddenly have an immediate recall, because you can have a regulation that could have sort of the nicotine levels that could be set a maximum. You can ban certain additives. You can have limits on emissions, but at the moment there's nothing in the bill that says you could have a recall just because of certain additives or nicotine levels.